The bright lights of the Hollywood studio beamed down like artificial suns, casting a golden glow over the vibrant stage where history was about to be made in the name of love and laughter. It was time for the Newlyweds game, a place where hearts met humor and where the strength of a marital bond was tested by the simplest of questions. The air was thick with excitement, the kind of electric energy that only exists when four couples are ready to share their stories with the world. Standing center stage, the announcer welcomed the audience with a voice that echoed the glamour of the industry. From Hollywood, it was the show everyone had been waiting for. He introduced the stars of the day with a flourish. First came couple number 1, who had been married for 4.5 months, Christy and Brian Hunter Muller. They walked out with the shy, sweet smiles of people still discovering the little quirks of living together. Following them was couple number 2, married for 9 months, Oriana and Andrew Valdez. They carried an air of confident joy, their eyes sparkling with the shared secrets of nearly a year of marriage. Then came the newcomers, couple number 3, married for just 3.5 weeks, Myesha and James Riley. The honeymoon phase was practically radiating from them in waves of pure affection. Finally, couple number 4, the veterans of the group, married for 17 months, Kelly and Brian Sivas. They stood with the steady, comfortable ease of a couple that had already weathered the first few seasons of life as one. With the introductions complete, the star of the show made his grand entrance. Bob Newbanks stepped onto the stage to a thunderous round of applause. He thanked the audience with a warm, practiced charm that made everyone feel like an old friend. He welcomed the 4 newlywed couples, noting how wonderful it was to have them all together. But the game had to begin, and that meant the first separation. Bob gave the signal, and the ladies were led away to a soundproof area, leaving the husbands alone on the stage to face the music. Bob turned his attention to the 4 men sitting on the colorful chairs. He reminded them of the rules, explaining that he would be asking 5-point questions. The goal was simple: the husbands had to predict how their wives would answer the same questions later. If the answers matched, they would earn points. At the end of the show, the couple with the highest score would win a fabulous second honeymoon. The stage was set, the ladies were gone, and Bob leaned in with the first 5-point question. He asked the gentlemen how often their wives would say they fantasized while making Whoopie. He gave them 3 options: all the time, some of the time, or none of the time. Brian Hunter Muller was the first to speak. He chose some of the time. When Bob playfully asked if he wanted to share any details, Brian declined with a polite but firm smile, keeping the sanctity of his private life intact. Next was James Riley. He also went with some of the time, adding with a charming grin that his fantasies were, of course, always about his beautiful new wife. Bob laughed and told him he ought to run for political office with an answer that smooth. Andrew Valdez followed suit, agreeing that some of the time felt like the right answer. He seemed perfectly at ease with his choice. Finally, the second Brian Sivas, also selected some of the time. He was quick to emphasize that his wife, Christy, was always the star of those thoughts. Bob chuckled, teasing the men about their perfect answers and joking that their noses might start growing like Pinocchio if they weren't being entirely honest. The humor continued as Bob moved to the next question. He wanted to know what one thing the wives would say their husbands thought they stuffed their faces with much too often. He asked for specifics. James was the first to jump in, suggesting that for Myesha, it was definitely bread. He noted that she had a particular love for biscuits. Andrew took a different approach. He didn't think it was food at all. Instead, he claimed Oriana stuffed her face with the phone, always having it right there in front of her mouth. The audience laughed at the clever twist. Brian Hunter Muller identified candy bars as the culprit for his wife, noting that she simply loved them. Meanwhile, Brian Sivas went with potato chips. He explained that it was all about the salt for Kelly, she just had to have that salty crunch. The final 5-point question took a slightly more personal turn, though it remained firmly in the territory of light-hearted fun. Bob asked the men to complete a sentence about their wives' families. The sentence was, "When it comes to my wife's family, I'd rather spend an entire day having a root canal than a few hours with her blank." He asked for a first name only. Andrew was the first to respond. He chose his wife's grandmother. When Bob asked what the trouble was, Andrew explained with a sigh that she simply didn't like him. He felt as though he had taken her granddaughter away, and she wasn't quite ready to forgive him for it yet. Brian Hunter Muller was a bit more hesitant. He eventually settled on his wife's brother, Rick. He clarified that he actually liked Rick a lot, but since Rick had been staying with them, the constant proximity made a root canal seem almost peaceful by comparison. It was a classic tale of a houseguest who had stayed just a bit too long. Brian Sivers had a unique answer: Grandma Boo Boo. He shared a delightful story about how she got the name because the family used to have a small dog named Boo Boo, and as children, they named the houses based on the pets. Bob thanked him for the charming anecdote. Finally, James turned to the camera with a look of mock terror and suggested his mother-in-law. He admitted she was a nice woman, but he couldn't think of anyone else to put in that slot. Bob laughed, noting that James had already said enough to get himself into a little bit of trouble. With the first round of questions finished, the show took a brief break for messages from its sponsors. The screen filled with opportunities for the viewers at home. There were advertisements for Medicare Part C plans, reminding seniors to check their benefits during the annual enrollment period to ensure they weren't missing out on dental, vision, or hearing coverage. There were mentions of help for veterans through the Wounded Warrior Project, and festive deals for Christmas trees at Balsam Hill. Each message was a reminder of the world outside the studio, but the heart of the show remained on the stage. When the show returned, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. It was time to reunite the newlyweds. The ladies returned to their husbands' sides, and Bob welcomed them back with a mischievous glint in his eye, telling them that the men had shared quite a lot of information while they were gone. The first 5-point question was revisited. Christy Hunter Muller was asked how often her husband fantasized. She hoped it was some of the time and that it was about her. When the match was confirmed, the couple celebrated their first 5 points. Oriana Valdez also chose some of the time, and when Andrew confirmed it was always her, the romance in the room felt palpable. Myesha Riley, however, went with none of the time. When James revealed his answer of some of the time, there was a moment of playful realization. James quickly reassured her that those fantasies were always about her, smoothing over the minor discrepancy with a smile. Kelly Sivers rounded out the group by correctly matching with some of the time, earning her couple their points. The game moved on to the question about stuffing their faces. Oriana guessed donuts, but was surprised to learn that Andrew had said the telephone. She laughed it off, even as Andrew joked that the phone was always in her mouth. Myesha also guessed the phone, but James had actually said bread. The light-hearted bickering between the couples was a testament to their close bonds. Kelly Sivers guessed ice cream, but Brian had predicted potato chips. She admitted that she did love the salt in the bag, proving that even if they didn't match perfectly, they knew each other's habits well. Christy Hunter Muller guessed cereal, while her husband had said candy bars. She insisted she didn't even eat candy bars, leading Bob to joke that perhaps he was fantasizing about someone else entirely. The final 5-point question about the root canal brought out some of the biggest laughs. Myesha guessed her sister, Malika, but was shocked to find out James had said her mother. She playfully warned him that her mother might be the one giving him a root canal later. Kelly guessed her brother, Scott, but Brian had chosen Grandma Boo Boo. Christy was the only one to find a perfect match in this round, correctly identifying that Brian would choose her brother, Rick. Finally, Oriana confirmed that Andrew would rather face a root canal than her grandmother, Celia, noting that the two of them simply didn't get along. After another round of informative messages about health benefits and vehicle protection plans, the show moved into the second half. The stakes were higher now, with each question worth 10 points. The husbands were sent off stage, and it was the ladies' turn to predict their husbands' thoughts. Bob asked the wives who was more wrapped around whose little finger. Myesha admitted she was wrapped around James's finger, though she liked to let him think that was the case. Oriana, Christy, and Kelly all confidently claimed that they had their husbands wrapped around their fingers. The next question was a bit more technical. Which room in their home had more square inches? Oriana and Christy both guessed the living room. Kelly chose the bedroom, while Myesha went with the kitchen. Then came a more provocative, yet still innocent question. The wives had to finish a sentence about one of their husband's friends. The sentence was, Whenever I look at my husband's friend blank, I can't help thinking how his what would look on my husband. Christy chose their friend Peter and his hair. Kelly chose Tom and his chest. Myesha chose Jonathan and his mustache, her face lighting up with a wide smile. Oriana chose Danny and his full head of grey hair. To end the round, there was a 25-point bonus question. What was the husband's least favorite vegetable? Kelly guessed asparagus, Myesha guessed peas, Oriana went with carrots, and Christy chose corn. The husbands returned to the stage for the final reveal. The tension was high as the scores were tallied. Couple number 1 and couple number 2 were tied with 10 points, while couple number 4 had 5. When asked about being wrapped around a finger, Andrew admitted he was wrapped around Oriana's, much to the amusement of the audience. James thought Myesha would say he had her wrapped around his, but they didn't match. Both Bryans admitted their wives had them wrapped around their fingers, earning their respective points. On the question of square inches, James guessed the living room, but Myesha had said the kitchen. Brian Sivas and Kelly found a match with the bedroom. Brian Hunter Muller and Andrew Valdez both matched with their wives on the living room. Then came the friend question. Brian Sivas guessed his friend Craig and earrings, but Kelly had chosen Tom and his chest. Brian Hunter Muller guessed his friend Peter and his waist, missing the match on Peter's hair. Andrew guessed Danny and his stomach, but Oriana had been thinking about Danny's grey hair. Finally, James guessed Jonathan and his chest, but Myesha had specifically mentioned the mustache. Before the final bonus question, the grand prize was revealed, a fun-filled one-week cruise with Costa Cruises, visiting beautiful ports like St. Thomas and Grand Cayman. It was a dream vacation that everyone wanted to win. The bonus round began. James guessed okra, but Myesha had said peas. Brian Sivas guessed Brussels sprouts, but Kelly had said asparagus. Brian Hunter Muller guessed broccoli, but Christy had said corn. Finally, Andrew Valdez guessed broccoli, while Oriana had said carrots. Since no one got the bonus question right, the game ended in a tie between couple number 1 and couple number 2, both with 30 points. To break the tie, Bob looked at the predictions the couples had made before the show about their final scores. Brian Hunter Muller had predicted 50 points, which was over their actual score of 30. Andrew and Oriana Valdez had predicted 42 points. Since they were the closest to their actual score, they were declared the winners. The studio erupted in cheers as Andrew and Oriana celebrated their victory. They were going on a second honeymoon, a reward for their love and their ability to navigate the funny, messy, and wonderful reality of marriage. Bob Newbanks thanked all the couples and the audience, closing the show with his signature warmth. It had been a day of laughter, a few surprises, and a whole lot of heart on the Newlyweds game.